Hi all. So, with regards to Fletcher's formation of situation ethics, he kind of comes up with two important frameworks. The first being the four working principles, and the second being the six propositions. So, we're going to go through each of the six propositions now, kind of the definitions of them, and some ideas as to kind of how they would impact upon decision making process when applying situation ethics to particular circumstances. His first proposition, a proposition being kind of like a suggested scheme or like a plan way to express an opinion. So his first proposition is that love is the only thing that is intrinsically good. So by intrinsically, we mean that it is good in and of itself and not good because it gives you something else. Not good, sort of the opposite being extrinsically. So that would be, as I say, something which is good only because it helps you to gain something further, something beyond the thing itself. So, like an example would be money. Money is extrinsically good because the only reason you want money is not because you enjoy feeling the paper or because you like the coins jangling in your pocket. You want money because it helps you to get other things. Okay, it is only useful to you, it's only good to you because it allows you to gain something further from it. The money itself is essentially just an IOU, a way of kind of at some point in the future gaining other things. So for Fletcher, love is the only thing which is intrinsically good. So love isn't good because it gets you money in the end, because it gets you kind of status or power or anything like that. Love is good because it's what you're aiming for. Love is good in and of itself. It's good because it is good. Sounds like a bit of a silly way to phrase that, but yeah, so it's not good because of what it can do for you. It is the thing that you are aiming for, the thing that you're desiring is, as I say, intrinsically good. So it is the good thing that you're after, not a way for you to eventually get the good thing that you want, like with money, which is only good because it is a way of you getting the good thing that you want in the end. Be that, a new pair of trainers or a meal in a nice restaurant. Okay, as I say, it's not the money that you're after because money is extrinsically good, whereas according to Fletcher, love is intrinsically good and is the only thing that's intrinsically good. So, how does this kind of apply to moral decision making? This love being intrinsically good? Well, it kind of re emphasizes or emphasizes the idea that love should be our ultimate telos, the ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve with our actions. So if you're deciding between should I help someone with their homework or chill out and watch the TV on my own for an hour, then we're kind of going back to this idea of okay, well, which of them is the most loving thing to do? Remember, we're talking love as in agape love, so unconditional love for humans. Which of those two choices is going to get us closer to that goal of being able to provide unconditional love to all of humanity? And according to Fletcher, this kind of makes sense because it's the fundamental principle behind Christian ethics. As far as he's concerned, all of the teachings and the regulatory kind of all the teachings within the Bible have an underpinning of this principle of love, and the Bible is just an example, or many examples of love in action. So, as I say, for practical application, this first principle of love being the only thing that's intrinsically good, it means that we are always aiming towards good in all of our actions because that's the only thing that is good in and of itself. So Fletcher's second proposition is possibly one of the most controversial. It's the idea that love is the ruling norm in all ethical decision making, and that it actually replaces laws. So if we're talking about the commandments that are found within the Old Testament, They just aren't as important as this ruling norm. So, norm being kind of an instruction how you should behave, they're replaced by this idea of love and agape love. Again, this is potentially quite controversial because, in a way, it's almost as though Fletcher's telling other people what the Bible says and kind of reinterpreting it for people based on his understanding of the principles behind it, which, as I'm sure you can appreciate, when you've had people, you know, following their faith and practicing their principles based on what's 2,000 years worth of influence, it's a controversial thing to turn around and say, well, you've kind of misunderstood it. This is how you should be doing it. In terms of how this applies to moral decision making, it's as simple as, kind of asking yourself, what would Jesus do? Because according to Fletcher, Jesus always puts this regulatory principle of love in action. It's his ruling norm. So what would Jesus do? The most loving thing. So again, going back to the example of helping someone with your homework or chilling out and watching TV, let's face it, Jesus had helped someone with their homework. The third principle is quite an interesting one, and perhaps one that might not seem entirely instinctive to most people, but it's the idea that love and justice are the same thing, in that justice is love that is being distributed. So when you are chastising or punishing a child for doing something wrong, you're not doing it because, you're frustrated or anything like that. You're doing it because you are trying to express love. Essentially, you can't kind of separate the idea of fairness or justice from the concept of love. Justice and fairness, properly applied, are expressions of love. So, in terms of practical application, if you're kind of a lawyer, judge, member of the jury, etc., and you're involved in the process of putting someone in prison, then that's not what that is, rather an expression of your agape love, so your unconditional love for humankind. You're doing the best thing for the most loving thing for that individual by putting them behind bars, and you're also doing the most loving thing for wider society at the same time. One of the more difficult of the propositions, perhaps, to put into practice in everyday life is number four, and that's the idea that love wills, wants your fellow humans good or good for them, regardless of whether they are someone that you like or not. So even if they're someone from an opposing team to you, someone that you've had issues with previously, the idea of agape love, again, selfless love for all humanity. So it shouldn't really matter that you've had personal grievances with them before. You should still be kind of willing them good, and willing them to kind of have a positive life moving forward, which, as I say, is probably one of the more difficult ones to put into place. But it is going back to the principles that Jesus set forward, and following his example of the teaching to love thy enemy as thyself. So even someone who, according to Jesus, would perhaps be considered your enemy, someone from an opposing team, you should still be willing them, you should still be wanting or desiring good for them, regardless of how you feel personally. Number five, another sort of controversial one, but perhaps not just for religious people, is that love is the goal or the end of the act, and that justifies any means to achieve that goal. So if you tell us your goal, your end is ultimately love, it doesn't really matter what you do to get to it. So perhaps in some circumstances that might mean murder, drugs, abortion are all the most loving thing to do, the most agape thing to do. And this is kind of where we see similarities to utilitarianism, but we also see that it's very much a teleological approach because it's all about kind of trying to achieve that telos, that end, that goal, and moral decisions, moral choices are judged or deemed to be good, bad, in between, based on whether they achieve that telos or not. There aren't kind of morally good or morally bad acts in and of themselves. So murder isn't necessarily a bad thing. Drugs aren't necessarily bad things. It just depends on whether in that particular situation, in that particular application of those acts, it helps to achieve the ultimate telos, the ultimate aim of agape love. So, in practical application, as we see there, there is no bad or immoral act. There are only kind of immoral consequences to your acts, and those are ones that don't bring about the most love from their consequences. So the final proposition is that love decides on each situation as it arises without a set of laws to guide it. In essence, there aren't kind of rules that you need to follow in order to do the most loving thing or to bring about the most agape love. It's entirely dependent upon the circumstances, and you can't kind of preempt that. You can't kind of go into a situation going, well, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to make the most people in this room happy because that tends to be the most loving thing to do, bringing about happiness. It's not necessarily the case. Perhaps the most loving thing to do in a particular circumstance is something that's not going to bring about much happiness. Again, kind of going back to the idea of love being intrinsically connected to justice. That's not always going to be the thing that brings about the most happiness isn't always going to be the thing that's fair and just. So we can't go into a situation saying, I'm going to make people happy. That will make be the most loving thing to do. Again, it goes back to this idea of it being situational. We have to look at the individual circumstances and decide from those circumstances what's going to be the most loving thing to do. Is it decision A? Is it decision B? Whichever one generates the most love is the right thing to do. I will say there is quite a lot of crossover essentially with these six propositions because ultimately they are all aiming towards the same thing. They do all have the same telos of what's the most loving thing to do. So it can be sort of difficult sometimes to distinguish between and kind of remember each of the propositions individually. It is important that you do though, just even if you can only remember the names of them. Well, obviously not only, but if you try to remember the names of them, hopefully that will help you to remember the distinctions between them.